Welcome back to Unit 2 for our APES Flipped Classroom. And today we're talking about ecological tolerance, or what we frequently call range of tolerance. So let's jump in and talk about what that means. So when we talk about the range of tolerance, we're talking about the range of conditions in which an organism can live. So that might be temperature, sunlight, salinity, pH, that an organism can endure before it is either injured, sickened, or even dies off. So we can talk about the range of tolerance on two different levels. So we have generally broadly a range of tolerance for a species, but we also are going to have ranges of tolerance for the individual organisms of that species. And so the individual organisms can have sometimes broader ranges of tolerance or narrower ranges of tolerance than their entire species. And of course, that species range of tolerance is really kind of an average of all of the individuals. So for example, we might say that salmon have a basic range of tolerance. They can tolerate temperatures between 6 degrees Celsius, which is just barely above freezing, to 22 degrees Celsius, which is pretty much a common room temperature, so about 73 to 75 degrees. Remember, we're talking about water temperature. So some individual salmon are going to have adaptations that are going to give them a range of tolerance that's outside the basic range for the species. So some might be more tolerant to colder temperatures, some might be more tolerant to warmer temperatures. And that's really just based on a difference in their genetic diversity. So let's take a look at these 6 different species of salmon, and you can see that across the bottom we have temperature. So these are the temperatures at which these salmon are living. And on the y-axis, we can see that we have this thing called aerobic scope, which is really just a way of measuring how efficiently they're processing oxygen. And so the more efficiently they're processing oxygen, the more efficiently they're performing all of their other bodily functions. And so the higher processing of oxygen indicates that that organism is really thriving. So as I said, this is due to that genetic biodiversity. So we're going to have some organisms within a species that are going to be able to survive at lower temperatures or higher temperatures. And that diversity, that genetic diversity, is going to make our populations of salmon more resistant to disturbances, particularly those like global warming. So if we have individuals that are more tolerant of higher temperatures, they're going to be better able to survive the warmer temperatures that are caused by things like the recent heat wave that we had in the Pacific Northwest, which is where we have a lot of salmon. And they were talking about the major problems that the salmon were having because the rivers were actually getting too warm for the salmon's range of tolerance. So the only individuals that were going to survive the river temperatures reaching extreme highs were going to be those individual salmon that have a higher range of tolerance, or whose range of tolerance falls at the higher end of the temperature. So we're going to talk about a couple of zones when we talk about range of tolerance. So the first one is the overall range of tolerance, and that is, of course, the broadest one. Within that, we have an optimum range, and this is where the organisms are not only surviving, but they're growing, they're thriving, they're reproducing. So when they're inside this optimum range, this is what we call their preferred niche. So this is where the conditions are pretty much ideal for them. So this might be the ideal pH, or as in the example of the salmon, it might be the ideal temperature. When we get outside to the edges of this range of tolerance, we get to the zone of physiological stress. So in this zone, the organisms are surviving, but they're going to start to show the effects of this stress on their bodies. So that might be things like infertility or a lack of growth, or it may slow down their overall activity. So as the water gets warmer, the salmon are going to be less active. That means they're going to be feeding less often. That means they're going to be struggling to grow. The zones of intolerance were completely outside the range of tolerance. This is the range where the organism is going to die. And it's going to die for a lot of potentially different reasons. If we're talking about temperature, it might go into thermal shock. If we're talking again about temperature of organisms in the water, they may actually suffocate because there might not be enough oxygen in the water. Water at higher temperatures contains less dissolved oxygen than water at colder temperatures. It might be a lack of food, it might be a lack of water, it might be a lack of oxygen. But when we get outside that range of tolerance, then we're reaching not just a point where the organism is injured or stressed, but actually can cause death of the organism. When we're writing FRQs, and the range of tolerance is a great tool for you to use when we're writing FRQs. So if we're asked about human activities or even about natural events that cause environmental disturbances, being able to connect your answer to this range of tolerance is a really powerful tool. So when it's appropriate, we're going to connect that human activity to climate change. So for example, we can say that electricity generation or transportation or agriculture all release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which contributes to climate change and global warming. And now we can connect that back to that range of tolerance. We can say that global warming shifts the temperature outside the range of tolerance for many tree species, or in our example, many salmon species, which causes their populations to decline. Or we could talk about global warming warming the ocean, which shifts the temperature outside the range of tolerance for many fish species, causing die-offs. So again, this is a tool in our toolbox to talk about why disturbances cause an issue in an ecosystem. We want to be as specific as possible when we're writing our FRQs. So when we're talking about a shift in range of tolerance, we want to specifically talk about what kind of physiological stress that's going to subject the organism to. So we could talk about suffocation because the temperature of the water is too high and there's insufficient dissolved oxygen. We can talk about thermal shock because the temperature is too low or too high and the organism is no longer able to maintain homeostasis. We can talk about a lack of water or food or nutrients or oxygen. So just make sure that we're being specific when we talk about it being outside the range of tolerance, that we're specific about what sort of physiological stress that subjects the organism to. So back to our example of global warming warming the ocean, it shifts the temperature outside the range of tolerance for many fish species. Because it increases ocean temperature, warmer water holds less oxygen, which leads to suffocation for those fish species. We can also apply this to plants because global warming can increase droughts. With increased droughts, rainfall patterns might shift outside the range of tolerance for many plant species. And without enough rainfall, these species may suffer a population decline because their roots are unable to absorb enough water from the soil. All right, so today's practice FRQ, I'm going to let you read. The link to this is in your SaintsNet page. What I'd like you to write for this particular FRQ is what you think the author's claim is. So I want you to read this article and identify the author's claim. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I look forward to seeing you in class.